So welcome everyone. Hope you're having a good time. I declare this meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome you all to our meeting here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respect to their elders both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So Council has a local law that determines how this meeting is to be conducted. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. For people who want to ask a question, could I ask that you limit it to questions if it's in public question time. There's a second opportunity to speak, and that's if you're speaking on an item. And you can ask a question or make a comment on a specific item in tonight's agenda. So this will be the first thing cab off the rank when we consider an item. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form, I assume everyone's done that is available at the table just outside the chamber. And I encourage you all to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes. And please try to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers, even if you really, really agree with them. Please note that all council meetings are now being live streamed, and it allows the community to watch and listen, so there may be more people attending tonight's meeting than is apparent here tonight. But please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instruction of the Chief Warden. Apologies, councillors. I know we have one senatorial apology, so that's been moved.
Yes. Just like to say that Councillor Louise Crawford is an apology.
Moved by Councillor Voss, seconded by Councillor Baxter. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting, which was a very quick meeting if I recall, held on the 1st of May, have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding those minutes? If not, can I have a resolution? Motion? Moved. Thank you, Councillor Voss. Seconded by Councillor Gross. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? Unanimous. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest that they, in a matter being discussed in tonight's meeting? No. So thanks very much. Councillors, we have one petition tonight, item 4.1, a petition requesting a child-safe access gate at 85 to 87 Tennyson Street. Councillors, we've received four requests from members of the public to speak to this item, and I'll now ask the first speaker. We take our submissions in that seat just there in the centre. If I could ask you to do two things. Well, it's just been put on the microphone and read your name and suburb into the record. The first one is Guillaume Steiner. Is Mr. Steiner here? Mr. Steiner? Paul Lowe? Oh, good. Hi, Paul. Please come. Please sit.
Sit here?
Yep.
Okay.
Tell us your name and suburb.
Do I have to press anything?
No, you don't.
Okay,
just
yes,
enjoy yourself and have a relaxing little talk.
I try. Yes, my name is Paul Lowe. I live in Elwood.
And yeah, if you could point, it's very directional. If you can point
like
it.
This?
Yep.
Is
perfect.
it better now? Okay. Okay. May I start?
Yep.
Okay.
Go for it.
Sorry for not being well prepared since the residents were not notified about this meeting until last night from a concerned resident. So I'm struggling a little bit. I hope you
That's
understand.
okay. It's all very relaxed
Okay.
here.
Regarding that child safe gate, actually, I'm one of the beneficiaries of increased 24/7 accessibility to the Neighbourhood Learning Centre as they create a shortcut between the Lease Street and the Tennyson Street for me. However, I do not see how the benefit will outweigh the negative impact that will have on me and my fellow residents. Okay. A point I would like to highlight that seems to have left out is the use of the laneway after hours. It's always from prying eyes and with a little foot traffic during the night. It would be an attractive place for vacancy, drug use, and vandalism. I have been living here for over 15 years, and I can attest to the fact that the laneway has been safe only because the original gate created the illusion that it was a gate driveway for the property next door. Even from an optimistic standpoint, the introduction of 24 hours access will lead to a rubbish accumulating in the laneway from the increased foot traffic, as well as a greater competition for the street parking spot. For residents such as myself, currently we have about 10 parking spots for 14 residents on the Lease Street. Especially during an event like Elwood Primary Market Day, it's difficult to find a park. I think it's safe to say that this infrequent struggle will become a daily occurrence if we constantly forced to compete with visitors of the community centre just parked in front of our own homes. Having heard my points above, what will you do to address my concerns with regard to the car park, safety and security of my fellow residents? Who will be in charge of keeping the lane clean and deter anything from happening in our safe and quiet street? That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. So what we're doing is just hearing people's views tonight.
Right.
And then we're, if there's a resolution, a recommendation of officers to bring the whole issue back to a later meeting.
Yeah, because what I can see is they just open the lane, so they redirect the traffic to what we call not through road. They just redirect all the traffic to pretty quiet lane at the moment. So that's the main issue, the main concern we have at the moment.
Thanks very much. All those concerns have been noted, and we'll incorporate them in the consideration of the issue.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is Guillaume?
Yes.
The seat's been warmed up for you.
Apologies
so
for my tardiness.
That's absolutely okay. You've got 3 minutes, unfortunately, not 3 hours.
No,
and
I think I can do that in the 3 minutes or thereabouts.
could I first ask you just to read your name and suburb into the record?
Yes, my name's Guillaume Steiner. I live in Elwood, 3184. I'm a committee member for Owners Corporation Plan number 29166, which is at 42 Scott Street, Elwood. Our property backs onto the parkland targeted by the petition and is about 20 metres from the proposed 24/7 pedestrian gate, access gate. I'm here to represent the Owners Corporation. We object to the petition before you. We feel, from what we can tell from everything, we feel that it is potentially a biased petition because Scott Street wasn't canvassed, and I'm not sure whether whether the petition brought before you actually shows any objections by people. I've actually been given an objection to read out by a member of the community at 15 Rothsay, but I don't think I'll have time. But she put in writing all the reasons why she would object to it. So if that's not part of the petition, it feels.
But that's okay.
Lopsided.
Please lodge that with our officers, and we'll keep.
Okay, not a problem. The area in question is a very dark and secluded area out the back once the sun goes down. So we're genuinely concerned about the possibility of increased vandalism and vagrancy in the area if the gate is installed, which could also increase the risk of nefarious activities at night. Currently the park has a single point of entry exit, which is quite open, and I believe it gives parents and carers peace of mind when taking children under their care into the space during the day, because they don't necessarily have to watch them like an absolute hawk. I believe that gate would probably change the fabric of the space and how it is currently used by the community, which I think it's a beautiful space and gets used well. So in summary, we believe that the convenience of this pedestrian gate outweighs the risk to safety of our property and the other adverse consequences of this proposed gate. So this is where I'm not exactly sure. I did hear you say that there may or may not be recommendation of officers to bring it back to the next meeting. Is that how it works? I'm not 100% sure of the process.
I just have to have a look at the officer's recommendation, but I think that's basically it. We receive and note it, and won't be back at the next meeting, or might be the meeting after that.
Okay, so
there's no decision being made tonight.
I understand. So if the council wishes to support this petition, I would urge that local residents have the opportunity to be part of a long and thorough consultation process.
Thanks very much, Guillaume.
Okay, thank you.
Isaac Herman. And Isaac, you've got some images. Oops.
So, my name's Isaac Herman, and I'm on the Committee of Management of the Elwood and St Kilda Neighbourhood Learning Centre. And I think, as you can see on the plans in front of you and on the screen, just put this out to give a bit more context on the maps in front of you. There's a little blue area, and that's where the learning centre is, sort of cut in half there. It's just above Knight Street, so you can see the entrance into the little laneway. Probably on the sheets in front of you, it's clearer. There's just it's just designated in orange, just a very narrow laneway, and the cross-hatched areas in front of you are those areas that have been lost to public open space. Mostly the school park in recent years has become locked up, padlocked during school hours, as has a portion of Mitford Street and Shelley or Scott Street there, as well as a number of other, as well as a canal side reserve, which has been permanently lost in terms of public open space. So the point of me explaining this is basically just to emphasise the lack and the loss of public open space, especially since the 1950s. Our population has doubled, but the amount of public open space is maintained the same or has even shrunk somewhat. If we could go to the next images. That's the entrance from Knight Street, so that's what we're talking about. One side's planted up. There's been a new construction, as you can see on the right there. If we can go to the next image, that's the current state. There's a padlocked, or not padlocked, it's bolted on, a bit of fencing there. So this would, and if we can go to the next image, please, and it would just give residents really easy access from all that lower end of Mitford Street and Rothsay Avenue, rather than having to do this whole walk around to Tennyson Street. If we can go through the next image. And yep. So we're hoping that just in terms of representing the neighbourhood house, that we can just present these sets of observations and just feel that it's in the community interest to have easy access to public open space. Look, as far as the contentions about any negative impacts of opening up this space, well, look, there are lots of laneways. Laneways make up the character of the neighbourhood, and there have already been enough of those lost throughout Elwood and St Kilda. So it's just about also maintaining the heritage fabric of the area as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Isaac, and thanks for the images. Lynn Whitner.
I'm Lynn Whitner. I live in Scott Street, Elwood, and my house actually accesses the back of the park. But my role here is that I'm also on the committee of management of the community of the neighbourhood house. So a bit of background to why this petition happened is that for quite a number of years, people have been asking through the toy library, and just because the neighbourhood house is the only physical building there where people can access somebody to speak to, they've been going in asking if there was possibility of access. It's become more pertinent in recent years because of a couple of things that have just been mentioned, with people actually being able to see that laneway goes into the park. Before it wasn't obvious because of a new development that went in there. So because we'd had so many inquiries, we just decided that what we'd do as a conduit for the community and as a community service, we as a neighbourhood house haven't taken an official stand on this, that we'd put a petition out, give people the opportunity to have a say, and we're just doing that as what we feel is things. So that's where this petition came from. It was done in January, and people had time to email in with responses as well, and I think they've all been submitted to Nick. So it was really just a community service. So when the development was going on, there was temporary fencing. People were walking through and around that fencing. Now, as you saw from the last photo, there was a problem because it was open and parents were concerned the place wasn't a child-safe place, and it's used by a large number of children's groups. They were concerned when the development finished that the laneway was just left wide open, and so they put the Parks and Gardens people put that temporary bit of wire up there. The other issue that's occurred now is that the people that were accessing it before are now climbing over that as well. So I've been out there and seen people climbing over it, so that's a concern as well. But that was our main role in setting up the petition. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. So, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Are there any questions that you have, councillors, about the petition or the officer's recommendation? Would anyone wish to move that the officer's recommendation? Moved Councillor Copsey, seconded Councillor Baxter. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Copsey? Do you wish to say anything, Councillor Baxter?
I'll just say that, as the Mayor indicated, this is a process of accepting the petition. Our officers and the councillors will then go away and have a look at the merits of the proposal there, and the officers will bring back a recommendation either way. Thanks
very much. I think that was useful to point out, Councillor Baxter. Any other questions? Any other comments? So we have the officer's recommendation moved and seconded. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that unanimous. Thanks very much. You might want to stay for just a second, Isaac. I've got something that might be good for you. So, agenda item 5 is a sealing schedule. Councillors, we have no documents that require sealing. Councillors, the CEO has requested, and I have given consent to adding an agenda item tonight in recognition of the passing of Elaine Miller. Councillors Elaine Doreen Miller was a former councillor of the City of Port Phillip, City of St Kilda, sorry, and she died on Monday, the 6th of May 2019. Elaine was the second woman elected to the St Kilda Council. I imagine, was Helen the first?
Helen was the first in 1974.
Right, so Helen was the first and Elaine was the second. But Elaine was the first female mayor of the City of St Kilda Council in 1982-83, and she was appointed mayor again in 87-88 and 88-89. She served on the St Kilda Council for 14 years, from 1976 to 1990. She was a strong advocate for social justice for all in St Kilda. She received an Order of Australia in 1995 for a contribution to local government. The flags at all three town halls were flown at half-mast on Monday the 13th of May in her honour. At the end of that day, the flag was lowered from St Kilda, folded, and the flag has now been given to the family as a mark of respect. And I believe it's appropriate that a condolence motion be moved. Can I just say, Elaine was fantastic. She was great fun, really nice, smart, you know, a perfect representative of local government. So, councillors, we have a proposed condolence motion, and would someone like to move this? And if I could read the proposal out, it is that Council expresses its deep regret on the passing of Elaine Miller, offers its sincere condolences to her family, and places on record its appreciation for her distinguished services to local government and in particular the City of St Kilda Council and the community that she served. So, moved by Councillor David Brand, seconded by Councillor Tim Baxter. Does anyone wish to speak?
I can't really improve on what you've said, but I have met her in the past, and she was a fantastic spirit.
She was fantastic.
And I know so many people in my community and in my life that that knew her very, very well and worked with her closely, and I know that they would like their regrets to be expressed too. She was a very, very important person in our community.
She was, and an ornament to the council. Does anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Baxter?
Yeah, look, I'll just say that it's at these times that we look back and realise that what has made up the fabric of what our community is known as is usually the work of these sort of people that have put in the hard yards and stood up for, as you say, social justice and caring for people, and that's what we're actually known for. We wouldn't be known for that if it wasn't for people like that. So it's a good time to acknowledge that legacy and to hope that we can continue it.
Thanks very much for those words, Councillor Baxter. I'll now move to the vote. The condolence motion is on the screen. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thanks very much, everyone. I just wanted you to hear that. Public question time. Councillors, we have 3 people who've requested to ask a question tonight, and I'll take these requests in the order that they've been received. I'll now call on Jack Halliday, to come forward, and please state your name and suburb for the record.
Jack Halliday from Balaclava, and I'm wanting to raise some concerns on behalf of the Port Phillip Alliance for Sustainability about problems we see with the draft budget as far as progress on climate adaptation is concerned. We all understand that our summers are getting hotter and drier, that Melbourne's having an increasing number of days of temperatures exceeding 40 degrees, that cities have temperatures of 5 degrees more than surrounding areas, and that there are significant social and health impacts, including deaths, as a consequence. What needs to be done about adapting Port Phillip to these changes? Here's a very good manual on what to do from the CRC for low carbon living at Monash, called A Guide to Urban Cooling Strategies. To summarise it, there are 7 major principles: increased tree canopy cover, more green planting in public spaces and around buildings, using heat reflecting materials for roofs, paving and road surfaces, increased pavement permeability, adding shade materials in open spaces, and last but very important, integrating these measures with water management, rain gardens and water features located in areas subject to high levels of heat build-up. If we look at the draft budget for next year, we don't see any sense of urgency. Targets for tree canopy cover, formalised by Council just last year in Act and Adapt, were set at increasing the current canopy cover of 19% by only 2% to 21% by 2028. Compare this target to that of Melbourne, increasing from 22% at present to 40% by 2040, or Ballarat from 17% currently to 40% also by 2040. The draft budget also shows that the number of trees to be planted in the next 2 years will fall from 1,519 in 2017-18, the last year for which figures are available, to 1,200 in this current year and 1,055 in 2020-21. We can't see any reference to any other of the measures I've just described above in the draft budget, except for a broad statement that a priority over the next 4 years will be to increase the permeability of ground surfaces across public streets and spaces, but no targets or timelines. More significantly, under the section A Greener, Cooler and More Livable City, there's a target in the next 4 years to develop a heat management plan to help cool the city and reduce the impact on health. 4 years? Really? PASS believes that the two main steps are necessary in correcting this situation. First, the sustainability components of the budget need to be urgently reviewed and more realistic targets set. Given that the time to tree canopy maturity is longer than 15 years for most species, this task is urgent. The second concern is that a number of sustainability objectives are housed in other departments, specifically open space and asset management, and the process of reviewing objectives like tree planting and depaving needs to be facilitated at senior levels within Council. PASS and its predecessor, the Port Phillip Environment Working Group, have been raising these issues of interdepartmental integration for over 10 years, but with little progress so far. The funds necessary to bring action into closer alignment with best practice aren't excessive, especially for one of Victoria's wealthiest councils, but will have long-lasting impact for the benefit of all of its residents and visitors.
So, there's a question. The question
is, can we ask that these 2 steps that I've just outlined be followed up in the budget process?
Thanks very much, Jack. That's, I think adaptation's really the challenge for local government. Mr. Walters, I imagine, is the best person to answer. Is that correct? And there was a lot of stuff, so you might have to take it on notice.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Halliday's observations with respect to the level of budgeting associated with environmental or sustainability initiatives will be taken as input to the as feedback for the budget process, which will be responded to as part of that.
So we'll roll it into that meeting that we're going to have, where we receive submissions on the budget.
Yeah, that'll be considered a submission to that. Mr. Trail can probably comment best on the Greening Port Phillip strategy, so I might pass to him for that bit of it, but I can also, actually, firstly...
Well, there was the permeable
surfaces issue. Mr. Halliday raised a number of issues, quoting from the CRC for low carbon living. Council officers are currently developing 2 implementation plans that relate to Act and Adapt, our sustainability strategy. Those are the Water Sensitive City Plan and the Climate Response Plan. And the Climate Response Plan will incorporate specific actions relating to management of the urban heat island effect. So that piece of work is scheduled for completion by the end of June this year. So that is really just an expansion in detail of the targets set and actions set in Act and Adapt. And Mr Trail might comment on greening Port Phillip.
Through you, Mr Mayor. To respond to questions provided to us today prior to this, there was a question regarding the budget with greening Port Phillip. I'll highlight that this current budget cycle proposes an additional 100,000 over previous years. It's been the combination of the street and park one. In there was a question about why tree planting is declining. That's a result of because we've progressed so far with our street planting guide, which expires in 2022. That's where we have our targeted plan on how we're going to deliver our greening Port Phillip and canopy targets. Right. There's more streets that impact roads and civil, and it's cost more money to install those particular sites. So as we get further into this canopy target, the cost of putting a tree in is going to be more expensive per tree. In terms of the targets, just I'll highlight that we do have a target of 21, and we will be looking at our scheduled tree planting guide for future 5 years, where we guide our financial investment to achieve those targets will come up.
Thanks very much. Can I throw to Mr CEO?
Through you, Mr Mayor, just to answer Mr Halliday's question around interdepartmental integration. Mr Walters might help me here, but I'm aware that both the water sensitivity plan and the climate response plan have involved all departments with responsibilities across the organisation. That is overseen by my executive, and we believe sustainability is not just in Mr Walters' department, it's responsibility of the whole organisation.
Good point.
And I couldn't really add to that, but thanks for the opportunity.
So, thanks very much, Mr Halliday. Jen? Sorry you weren't first.
Jennifer Edge, Euro St Kilda. I want to acknowledge the Elliot Willem of the Bunurong. That got omitted earlier for some reason. Their elders, past, present and emerging, and their custodianship of the land which we
I slipped it in.
Oh, my hearing, my apologies. I also want to acknowledge Councillor Pearl for allowing me to ask a question. I've been suitably admonished and somewhat better informed now by a Councillor Bond in regards to the question I asked at the planning meeting, which I've received no response on, hence being here again. I'll refer to the draft Community Safety Action Plan, page 7, priority areas, safer places, streets and activity centres. Item 4, page 10, although I noted the page was also numbered 114, states, we take a proactive and informed approach and where possible put preemptive measures in place to mitigate risks. I acknowledge meetings in November with Councillor Baxter, in May with Councillor Brand, in April with Peter Benzake, and subsequently with State Member for Albert Park, Martin Foley, and the inroads that Peter Benzake have made on the particular issues I've raised. And continue, therefore, what preemptive measures regarding infrastructure, in particular varying utilities pit covers, signage, street trees, support stakes and accompanying ties and footpaths, including regular audits as are carried out by the City of Hervey Bay and the City of Hobart, along with reviewing same and improving communication participation with and by Telstra, Vic Roads, Melbourne Border Works, South East Water and any other City of Port Phillip departments and or stakeholders, power brokers, to ensure fast, efficient and effective remedy, please. Seems ridiculous that after 12 years I still can't get a hole covered. Thanks in advance.
Thanks very much, Jen. Do we have a... I always need to use surnames. I always forget them. Ms Blair?
Through you, Mr Mayor, in relation to the assets that aren't ours, we're currently reviewing our process for how we conduct audits when works have occurred on council land. So we're looking at how we can improve our service delivery there. In relation to audits on infrastructure that we own, we do undertake regular audits on our footpaths, trees and roads. But of course, we're always looking to see how we can continue to improve our service levels around our asset management.
Thanks very much. Robbie?
Robin Yagui, St Kilda. My question relates to the St Kilda Marina and St Kilda Land Act. So prior to the council decision regarding the short-term lease for St Kilda Marina, council officers advised, and this is kind of a quote, the St Kilda Land Act 1965 is a site-specific act relating solely to the St Kilda Marina land. It authorises the leasing of land subject to the act, and a lease for this site must comply with those requirements. Because these special leasing powers apply to the St Kilda Marina land, the generic leasing powers contained in the Crown Land Reserves Act 1978 are not applicable. We've obviously moved beyond that now. We've got this short-term lease in place. And I guess that sort of statement for us in the community raised a number of questions around the adequacy and the sort of purpose of the Land Act moving forward. And I've got a couple of questions that kind of flow from that. Firstly, does the St Kilda Land Act provide exemptions from any of the provisions of the Marina and Coastal Act 2018 and the Retail Leases Act of 2003? Beyond leasing, what other areas does the St Kilda Land Act create a different standard in legislation, regulation and oversight to if it just simply wasn't there in the first place? Would Council agree that it would be more consistent and optimal from a governance perspective to have a marina covered by the standard statewide acts rather than a standalone site-specific land act? Would a repeal of the St Kilda Land Act impact on the current tender timeline? And sort of finally, does the City of Port Phillip currently have a position on the repeal of the St Kilda Land Act? Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll take those questions on notice and respond in due course.
I think that's a sound thing to do. It sounded pretty tough questions. Thanks very much, Roy. Councillors, there's no further people who wish to attend public question time, and we now turn to councillor question.
May I ask a question?
Of course, if it's a question.
It is a question. So the question is, may I rebut 2 points made?
No, we've dealt with that stuff.
Okay, because it came after my...
Sure, I get that.
Just because I want it on the record, that's all.
We will, I promise you, it will come back.
With the process. No, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. It's better process if we deal with it when it comes back. I'm happy for your rebuttals to be, if you could just give them in paper.
Okay, that's fine. I was just hoping to have it on the record, that's all.
Yeah, they've left the chamber and we can't have a...
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that, Mr Steiner.
Thank you.
No, you've had your opportunity. Sorry, Jen. We have to move on with the rest of business. It's a very full board. Councillors, any questions? Thanks very much. Agenda item 8 is the presentation of reports. So I'll now move on to presentation of reports. 9.1, Victorian Mental Health Royal Commission. Councillors, we haven't received any request from a member of the public to speak to this item. So do we have any questions of yourselves? And if not, can we... Oh, one question, yep.
Thank you, Mayor. Just noting the recommendation, and I was just wondering whether it would be wise to have an item in there that the CEO may make minor edits, then if that's a recommendation that is going to get up.
Can I invite you to move it with that amendment?
Sure, thank you. Then I'd like to move that recommendation and add 3.3 to that recommendation to give the ability to the CEO to make minor edits to the submission. Intent.
Great. Thanks very much, Councillor Voss. Do we have a seconder for that? Seconded. Councillor Bond. Do you wish to speak? No? Yeah. Does anyone else wish to speak? Let's move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So we now move to agenda item 9.2, the Multicultural Advisory Committee Terms of Reference and Communication Plan. Councillors, we don't have any questions from the public. Do you have any questions? Or now I am aware that there's the Councillor Simic has a resolution to move. This being his area of...
Mr Mayor, can I move an alternate recommendation to the report provided to the public? The alternate motion adds...
I think we've got it up there.
Yep, so adds the word draft in 1.1 and adds 1.2.
Could I ask you to read that out for us, Councillor Simic?
So that Council approves the draft Multicultural Advisory Committee Terms of Reference. 1.2 notes that the terms of reference will be subject to further consultation and will be brought back to adoption at a future council meeting, for adoption at a future council meeting. And 1.3 notes that the terms of reference state that the chair and deputy chair are nominated from amongst the membership. This is similar to the Older Persons Consultative Committee, which is an advisory committee to council.
So that's been moved by Councillor Simic, seconded by Councillor Pearl. Do you wish to say anything?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This has been quite a lot of work getting to this point. The Council, when we were all elected in this term, had a multicultural forum, which has been operating for some time already, and the multicultural forum in its form probably wasn't meeting its objectives, and a decision was made working with the officers that the work of the forum be looked after by MyCare, who's a provider and able to work with the group of people who were formed around that group. So we've been in consultation with officers over some period where Council has been reviewing all of our advisory committees and advisory bodies anyway, and we've been looking at the best way to make sure that our multicultural community has a seat at the table at Council, and there's very effective mechanisms for us to consult with the multicultural community. A huge number of people in our community are born overseas, and something like 30% of people speak a language other than English at home. So it's really important that we make sure that our Council keeps that in mind and is working with the multicultural community effectively. So this is a first step, which is for these draft terms of reference to be to continue to be worked on with organisations in our area that provide multicultural support or have involvement in multicultural issues, and for us to be able to talk to other stakeholders, individuals in the community who might be interested in joining this body, so that we can really shape a very good terms of reference going forward. So I hope that councillors will support this. There's still some way to go before we have a well-functioning and proper functioning Multicultural Advisory Committee, but certainly this is an important start.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl.
these may seem like small words that have been changed in Councillor Simic in his alternative motion, but they're very important words, and just want to congratulate you on putting this forward, Councillor Simic. It shows that the councillor involvement, at its best in terms of this is our job to get involved in areas of passion and areas of interest, and when a councillor is involved at a greater level, we as a group benefit. So the work you've done here will deliver a better result, and we're all the wiser for it. So thank you very much for putting this forward this evening.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pearl. Are there any further questions, speeches, contributions? Councillor Voss?
Yes, just briefly, I'd also like to thank Councillor Simic for putting this alternative motion forward. The current terms of reference here are very clear. However, this is a brand new committee, new advisory committee, and it's really important that we liaise and consult with the people that are going to be part of it, to make sure that this is a committee that works for them. So we just can't have the standard off-the-shelf terms of reference if it's not going to work for everyone. So it's important that we take this step to consult with them and bring it back and then have it fully endorsed by Council. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Do you wish to close, Councillor Simic? Thank you. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much. Agenda item 10.1, paid parking fee trial evaluation, South Melbourne Precinct findings and recommendations. Councillors, we have no contributions to be made from the community. Do you have any questions? Do we have a resolution? Moved the officer's recommendation. Moved Councillor Copsey, seconded Councillor Baxter. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Copsey? Councillor Baxter? No. Does anyone else wish to speak? I'll move to the vote. There's no other speakers. So all those in favour? All those against? I declare that carried. Agenda item 11.1, Graffiti Management Plan, 2019 to 2024. Once again, there are no members of the public who wish to speak on this matter, but you might have some questions. Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask one simple question, that is what changed between the initial draft through the consultation to the final draft. If you could just outline those, please.
Through you, Mr Mayor, no distinct changes were made from the graffiti management plan itself. The only thing that was adopted by the officers and recommended is that ongoing consultation should continue to occur on several points, specifically graffiti at height. Other instances would be involving the Department of Justice correctional system. Those are things that will be investigated further. Those were points that came up as part of the second phase of consultation, but no changes to the draft itself.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl.
Just wondering what role does design of the landscape and the buildings play potentially in this policy? I didn't see much of it in there. So we design and approve all the landscapes that are constructed in our city. And in terms of the construction that we do ourselves, so far as I'm aware, we don't have graffiti management as one of those items that should be incorporated into the design factors in sports buildings and all those sorts of things. What role should that play in this policy in the future and in other policies within council in the future?
Through you, Mr Mayor, this is something that's a growing area of our industry. We definitely take it into account in consultation with our project services team. A notable example of that would be the recent Peanut Farm Reserve location. We're consulting with our public arts officer to develop mural options for that particular site. In regards to other locations going forward, we're also consulting with our project services team in regards to use of anti-graffiti surfaces, paint types, and also crime prevention through environmental design principles.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl?
One of the best murals in Port Melbourne had very little to do with the city of Port Phillip, and was a good community project that didn't involve any of our money, not much of our time, and produced a stunning outcome. How can we get much more of... there was no grant. We didn't pay for anything on that one. So that was all donated money. We did provide health and safety access support, but we didn't provide any funds. I'm not talking about Edwards Park, just to be clear. How do we promote more of that sort of activity? Because that's a wonderful outcome, and it'll be nice to get more of that, if possible, in the future.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Absolutely, that's an area that we are, again, moving into. We're working with several businesses in regards to identifying the graffiti hotspots, working with them on collaborative approaches, not only with the businesses but also with third-party asset owners as well. It's absolutely an area that we need to move more into, and where we get greater traction and leverage of results.
I'm assuming that this is going to round off the previous resolution around the community correctional services. In the report, you state that the current time officers are recommending that the service provided by the Department of Justice is unable to replicate the service levels that we required. Is that how we are dealing with that part of the previous resolution? Are you able to sort of elaborate on that, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we can absolutely expand upon that. As was also touched upon within the report, officers are also working towards a new contract tender. The development of that contract tender service specifications will also inform how we move forward with other subsidiary approaches, of which the correctional services will be one.
Thanks, Ms Taylor. Okay, can we move... Does anyone wish to move a resolution? Councillor Voss wishes, and Councillor Baxter, I assume you're doing the officer's recommendation. Anyone wish to speak to it? Yeah, Councillor Voss, you
as a mover, yes, rights. I would like to speak to it. Thank you. And the recommendation is just to endorse the graffiti management plan, and I would absolutely like to do that, because what we've now got is, a framework and guidelines for how we actually manage graffiti in our municipality. This is a 10-year plan. We've had a very comprehensive consultation phase, and this final plan has my full support. We've gone through consultation with the community, which has identified clear priorities, and they're all reflected in the plan. And we know that graffiti is a topic that just hits everyone's buttons. We know that everyone has a view. Some think of it as a creative expression, and others think of it and start feeling insecure. So I'm really pleased to confirm that this plan continues to deliver free graffiti removal service for our community, except for anything above 3 metres. We remove obscene and offensive material even quicker than we did before. Anything on any of our public toilets gets removed very quickly. We're going to be delivering more beautiful street art and greening our problem spots. And we have a hotspot list now, hotspot precincts, which will elicit even swifter action. So very happy with those. And during the last 6 months, I've noticed significant changes in how we deal with graffiti, and I'd just like to congratulate the officers on that. We've also had tricky issues in dealing with other authorities' assets, and I've also seen some success around that. For example, Vic Roads, in which we've contracted people to actually paint some artwork, in particular around Fitzroy Street, and also, I think most notably, the Australia Post green boxes have amazingly started to be cleaned themselves. So that's obviously the work by Australia Post and their contractors, and they were absolutely disgraceful, and now I'd just like to give a bit of a shout out to them, because they've really picked up their act and are being a good corporate citizen. I'd like to thank the community that have participated in this whole process, because without them, you know, we wouldn't have some validation around these priorities. But just want to say congratulations. I endorse this plan and I look forward to seeing the results of the actions that are in the plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Baxter?
I won't say too much. I'm definitely supportive of this plan. It's good to sort of pull everything together and explain how we're going to do this over the next, I thought it was 5 years, it's 10 years. But I think that one of the most important things, one of the things that I'm most supportive of here is the street art program, and I think that because I live in Balaclava and it is well known as a hub of street art, and it is fantastic. It's really actually something that makes me very proud to live where I am, and I love living there, and I love that we are going to continue doing that, and not just murals on walls, but also utilising other infrastructure to do that is really great. I'm personally not as worried about tagging as other people. I know that might be a controversial thing to some people, that it doesn't bother me as much, but I certainly I love that we're going to be investing in putting that art out there, which is fantastic.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl?
Support everything that's been said. I just would also say that we have to work on the design of things and the planning of things to improve this problem. The two examples I think of are the tram stop that's been recently created in Montague by the school, which is terrific and great, but it's obvious as soon as the thing was opened, you knew it was a blank canvas for people to graffiti it and tag it, and sure enough, a year on since then, it's starting to look exactly that way. The other example is the wonderful ice cooler, which has been placed as the tram power substation down on St Kilda Junction. These things need simple design factors that cost very little money up front that can save the community heartbreak and also dollars in the future. Also just want to thank the people in South Melbourne, I don't know who they are, who go around and clean all the light posts. That's probably horribly illegal and it's probably something we don't encourage, but they go around and paint everything probably once every 2 weeks, and most areas around Farrar Street and St Vincent's Gardens are very clean for that exact reason. But support this motion here this evening.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pearl. Anyone else? Do you wish to close? Councillor Voss? No. I move to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Sorry, 12.1, Footpath Trading Fee Policy, Outcomes of Consultation and Consideration for Adoption. Councillors, there's nothing... Oh, there is one speaker. David. Hi. Could I ask you to push the button?
Mr. Mayor.
Read your name and a suburb into the record, please.
David Blakely, St Kilda, and also the President of Fitzroy Street Business Association.
Thanks very much, Mr. Blakely.
Mr. Mayor and fellow councillors, it's a shame that Holly's gone, because I'd like to thank what she... last weekend we had a piece of public art done on the graffiti art at 64 Victoria Street, and I think it's a great addition to the street, and we're looking forward to working with Holly in the future. Tonight I'm here to talk about the park, the Fitzroy Street Business Association welcomes the reduction of fees for Fitzroy Street. There's a couple of questions we wish to know. How are the fees determined? And this is for Greater Port Phillip also. And are they compared to other local councils such as Stonington, City of Melbourne? And given the economic climate at the moment and the amenity bought by seating on the street, I find having people on the street makes streets feel safer. Is there a scope to further reduce the fees for community benefit and trade benefit, of course, also?
Thanks very much, Mr. Blakely. I might ask Mr. Borg and Mr. Jay to help us out with this.
Might have to turn your microphone on.
There's too many mics on.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Since 2003, the Port Phillip model has utilised retail rents to determine outdoor dining fees. This has been considered to be an equitable measure that acknowledges that retail rents vary significantly across the municipality. Officers have investigated how outdoor dining fees are being determined at other inner city councils and the rates that they charge. There is no common method being used to determine these rates. However, the proposed outdoor dining fees would be similar.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the third question, is there scope to reduce the fees further? You might want to point to the changes since this last came that have been introduced, Mark.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, the Council can review any decision with regard to fees throughout the year. Officers can consider reductions under authorisations provided under local law. And as Fitzroy Street is a designated placemaking precinct, there is also further opportunity to review fees through the placemaking programme.
Mr CEO?
I'm going to do it. So through you, Mr Mayor, so there have been reductions, Mr J, you may wish to talk about them in terms of the revitalisation rate and the reduction in planter boxes and the reduction for new outdoor dining, is that correct? Can you just explain those in answer to the question?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. Fitzroy Street feedback from the consultation has resulted in a number of additional measures to support the traders. One has been the introduction of a revitalisation rate, which is triggered when there are a significant number of vacancies within a strip and an area. And also when our valuation data informs us that the retail rents have reduced. We have also put in an additional measure, which is to make planter boxes free of charge. And the annual administration fee has also been reduced from $120 down to $70 per year. Any new outdoor dining opportunities that are undertaken in the revitalisation area, which is the Fitzroy Street primary section of the street, those fees would be reduced by 100% for the first year.
Thanks very much. Thanks, David. So, councillors, there are no further questions from the community. Councillor Voss, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to get some clarification around the planter boxes. I'm very supportive of that being a free initiative to brighten up some of our streets. Is there any size limitation on those planter boxes?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the Footpath trading guidelines does have some requirements in place, so officers would still be checking the sight lines and the locations to make sure that drivers' vision is not being obstructed. So officers would take into account the measurements of the planter box, and it would be on a site case-by-case basis.
So my question is, does a business have to apply to have a planter box in order to make sure that those recommendations are followed?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the answer is yes. It is a requirement under local law for a permit presently to be required for a planter box.
Councillors, do we have... if we have no further questions, could I ask about a resolution? Councillor Copsey, you're happy to move the officer's recommendation? Seconded. No. I'm happy to second it unless... I'll second that resolution, that motion. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody who's participated in the review of our footpath trading fee policy. It's been a very considered undertaking by our officers, pulling together a lot of processes that have developed and diverged over many, many years. Outdoor dining and alfresco is part of the vibrancy of our city. It's something that council certainly wants to encourage, and the objective with this policy has been to come up with coherent and equitable ways for businesses to help to contribute in that way to the amenity of our city and the vibrancy of our city. So thank you very much for everybody who's participated in the consultation. We have made changes, and officers have made recommended changes based on that to encourage further footpath trading uptake in areas that are either new or are undergoing revitalisation. So we do hope that that will be taken up by the community, and we're looking forward to seeing this hopefully make it easier for businesses to contribute to the vitality of the city with really vibrant outdoor dining scene.
Thanks very much. I'm the seconder. I don't wish to speak, showing an exemplary restraint. Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this because I think we have taken something that should be very, very simple, and we've well and truly overcomplicated it with a 22-tiered system of footpath trading across the city of Port Phillip. It's every year we do this, we're going to have to hire a team of actuaries and property rental experts in order to come up with the base numbers from which we will derive our 20% footpath trading fees. And you're going to have so many people arguing against this system each and every year. We're going to have those arguments repeatedly, and different shopping strips are going to be pointing at each other saying why they charge more and this and that. So it's not often I praise the city of Yarra, and I could think of plenty of reasons not to praise them, but they have a flat fee of a certain amount per table and a certain amount per chair, regardless of where it's located within the city of Yarra. And that's a system I think we should have here in Port Phillip, something that's nice, simple, everyone's treated the same. The purpose of our footpath trading is not to make money, it's not to bring in rental, it's to revitalise streets or activate streets or have people on the streets. The best parts of our city are those that have the activated outdoor dining areas, such as Cecil Street at South Melbourne Market, or Ackland Street, or Bridport Street in Albert Park. They are the best parts of our municipality. We should be trying to maximise them wherever we can. It's great that in here we've got we don't charge for planters. I'm not sure why we ever charge for planters out in the footpath. It's great that we've got this revitalisation rate for Fitzroy Street. God knows Fitzroy Street needs a lot of help at the moment, and helping out the traders down there is just another small step towards helping them. I think we've just overcomplicated this, so I can't support it.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Any other speakers? I might speak just to say, the benefit of complexity is sometimes equity and fairness. So I think that the methodology that's been deployed in this particular paper is very fair. I thought it was an excellently put together proposal, and I always regret complexity because I can't get my head around it, but I think that in this particular case it adds to the level of fairness, and I think that's a good thing. Any other people wish to speak? Do you wish to close, Councillor Copsey? Move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Thanks very much. Sorry? Okay. But I'll start anyway. Yeah. I'm afraid, okay, so agenda item 12.2, St Kilda Marina project, endorsement of the St Kilda Marina site brief. And unfortunately, Robbie Niagwe, you're the first speaker and you're going to have Councillor Brown out of the room.
Robbie Niagwe, St Kilda. No, that's okay, Mr Mayor. I've had many a conversation with Councillor Brand about the Marina, so I think nothing I say should hopefully be new to him.
It's very, very benevolent.
First, I want to thank officers for continuing to engage in the community and work with us. I sort of obviously have spoken on a few other things about the Marina, but I haven't really had the opportunity at this kind of forum to really thank them in terms of the panel. That was a really excellent process that the city engaged in, something that hasn't been done before and something that I really hope I'll see the city engage in again in future, potentially in things like a participatory budgeting process maybe next year. But I think it's meant that the grounding of this document is something that's actually had long and deep conversations with a broad range of people within the community. I guess there's a bunch of stuff that I'm really excited about and happy with, and I'll get to them in a second, but I guess there's one kind of key area that I think is an issue that starts at the beginning of the document when we're talking about views and then flows through into other areas later on, and that's around the views from Blessington Street and Dickens Street. Basically, the document in the verbal form talks about being able to kind of go down those streets and look out to sea, basically, and look through the marina and then look out to sea. And when you look at the figures and the diagrams and the maps, the lines don't line up with the streets. And I don't think that's for any ill will, but that is ultimately a fundamental problem with the site brief and something I think really needs to be rectified. It's on page 54 when you have the views that you can see that the lines don't line up with those two streets. And that then flows through onto page 64 when you're talking about built form. I think part of the problem there is that, obviously, and particularly it's pertinent with Dickens Street, is that it does ultimately cut right through the middle of what is most likely going to be the major commercial area on the site. And I can understand the reluctance to prevent development right through the middle of that southern end of the site. And if you look at the map, it kind of bends, but with views, that's simply not how the things work. So if you're looking down Dickens Street and there's a building in the way, then those views aren't achieved. And I understand that's going to create greater complexity in terms of the build, but I think it's something that does need to be rectified. More broadly, though, I think there's a lot of great stuff in this. I'm really excited to see that the bridge is still on the table. I think that's something that I personally, as a panel member, advocated very strongly for. And there's a lot of views on the community about it, but I think it's something that we really can't be ruling out at this stage in the process. Through the complementary uses, I'm really glad to see that we've got to the 3,600 square metre number. I think that's a safe number. It's a bit smaller than many would want, but I think ultimately, and you have an additional option with the 1,400, but ultimately I think that kind of reduces the size of the site, and that's probably one of the things that got the triangle unstuck many years ago, and I think if we want to prevent this process from ending up like that, to me that's key. Really excited to see the Civic Heart has been included. There's a number of other great things in there, but as I say, I think that the views issue needs to be resolved in the document itself. The figures need to line up with the words. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for your generous and I think deserved praise of our officers in the report. Can I foreshadow that I'll be asking the officers to clarify the issue about the sight lines afterwards? Peter Tanner?
Peter Tanner, St Kilda. There are two issues that I wanted to provide comment upon in regard to the site brief. The first one is the 500 square metre increase in the size of the boat shed. The boat shed will now be 7,000 square metres, an increase of 7% over the previous nominated limit being 6,500 square metres. This increase will now accommodate commercial activities within the boat shed, such as a restaurant or bar. Refer section 4.72 of the endorsement paper of the site brief. I would suggest that other more appropriate commercial activities would be in the boat shed would be the boat service function. Boats stored and within the boat shed and in the wet berths will need site service capacity. This activity doesn't look to have received any or much attention within the site brief. The current boat service centre takes up 12% of the current boat shed capacity. I would also suggest that as the western front of the boat shed will be the closest building on the marina to the bay water edge, that water-focused activities should receive priority within the boat shed, such as stand-up paddleboarding, kayaking and kiteboarding. If it is determined that a restaurant or bar is to be part of the boat shed building, it could potentially change the nature of the building of the marina, particularly if it's placed close to the centre of the marina, where the noise effects over the channel would be greater. If this were to happen, strong soundproofing should form part of the construction, as noise has been an issue for residents, and open balconies on the west should not be included within the boat sheds. Such a requirement would also be consistent with the marina site vision and objectives, particularly social and cultural, i.e. creating opportunities and flexible spaces for active and passive recreation and quiet enjoyment and culture. Noise considerations are also recognised within the existing liquor licences, conditions and VCAT decisions. Both the current marina restaurants have been subject to VCAT decisions, reference P1230-211 for Riva and P2677-2012 for the Great Provider. Both decisions noted that the area is not in an activity centre and is located within a public park recreation zone. Potential respondents to the EOI, expressions of interest, should be aware of this site history. I've lived in my current home a decade before the restaurants commenced. The second issue is the Rollo's kiosks. The site brief under 6.13, Other Services and Facilities, notes Rollo's kiosk has a key role in servicing the adjacent skate park. Whilst I don't disagree with this observation, the existing wording makes it sound as if the kiosk is not to be subject to any change. I would note that the Council's planning permit 95-2014 notes that the kiosk is a relocatable building. I would suggest that if a site closer to the skate park can be identified, then the link with the skate park would be further enhanced. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Mr. Tanner. Peter Holland?
Peter Holland, St Kilda. Let me start by reminding councillors of what a marina is. Under the Act, its definition includes providing facilities for the recreation, comfort and convenience of members of the public. So it's quite legitimate for council to consider the interests of the boating community, but also the interests of the general public. And I want to just briefly address 4 points. The first is the bridge over the mouth of the marina. I'm a passionate advocate of this. It's got various advantages. It creates a bay trail for pedestrians and cyclists. It's much safer than the existing setup. It will significantly boost the viability of any harbour village, and the bridge can create a new icon like the existing beacon. Now, the site brief itself, with its provisions on the bridge, is, I think, acceptable, but perhaps it can be made stronger. The site brief proposes that it's mandatory for tenderers to make provision for a bridge at some stage in the future built by somebody, and that it's desirable for the tenderer to build the bridge and to build it of an excellent design. I'm inviting the councillors to consider whether to strengthen this provision. One way of strengthening it would be to make the provision of the bridge mandatory, but another way would be to recognise the fact that the bridge provides a public interest and so give a credit to a tenderer who proposes to build a bridge. Perhaps this could be in the form of an expanded commercial footprint. Secondly, the beacon. The site brief proposes that the obligation is to restore and maintain the beacon, which is a very flimsy, old structure that doesn't have any function aside from a very important decorative function. And I suggest that perhaps the brief should consider an alternative, that is, that it might be cheaper to build a new beacon rather than to keep patching up the existing beacon. And the new beacon could then also have a functional aspect, and the obvious functional aspect would be to incorporate a lookout. This again would be a massive public benefit. Thirdly, the Marina function. As I read it, the essential vision of the site brief is that the Marina should function business as usual, that we've got the storage and launching of boats, pretty passive, often nothing much is happening at the Marina. I wonder whether the site brief should envisage a vision of the Marina being a destination for boats from elsewhere, so that we're targeting visiting boats. The St Kilda Marina becomes a destination, and that would mean that you incorporate some sort of transient small harbour for visiting boats. If we had an active marina like that, it benefits not just the boating community, but it's also much more interesting for the general public to see boats coming in and out. Finally, I question the need for the planning amendment, which is of course very time-consuming and expensive. I wonder whether Council can achieve all its objectives, for instance, if it doesn't like a service station, whether it can achieve its objectives by using its powers as a landlord with the EOI and the lease, and that we don't need to go through the process of a planning scheme amendment. I don't expect that councillors will just rubber stamp this site brief. It's clearly an important document for an important project, and if we can improve it with the various suggestions that have been made tonight, let's improve it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. So, officers, Ms McNeil and Ms Rosanek. Okay, can I just try to recollect, and you can make sure I've got it right. The first one we had were view lines from the hinterland around Dickens Street, and were they, what do we say about that?
Oh, through you, Mr Mayor. The view lines through the site to the horizon, as they were defined earlier, came into discussion, or were further analysed, and through discussion with councillors, it was acknowledged that some of those view lines were perhaps a bit forced, so whether it was actually possible to even see the sea and the horizon and the view from Blessington and Dickens Street because of things like the skate park and the sea wall surrounding up against, or the height of the sea wall, and the future increase in height of that sea wall from Dickens Street and Blessington Street. So the way they've been reinterpreted in the brief as it now stands is the importance of approach views. So when you enter the site, being able to see into the site, and when you're in the site, seeing through the site towards the sky, towards the bay, towards those key landmarks. So the intention of those approach views is maintained, although the way they've been described as direct lines on those approach have been reinterpreted to be from moments of arrival into and through the site.
Are there any... Mr McLean, is it okay if I ask councillors if you've got any follow-up questions in relation to view lines? Oh, we've got the poor man in the dock. Okay, thanks very much. That was great. The next one, Mr. Tanner. Sorry. Yes.
Just on the view line from Dickens Street across the site, not to the horizon, because when you're in Dickens Street you can't actually see the horizon. what value have we actually stated in the criteria that actually encourages that the expression of that axis coming along Dickens Street through the site? And I guess I'm looking for something, even though we may allow some degree of encroachment at some level into the site, we are certainly, well, I just want to understand how we are saying that those view lines are still valued, but they're just being able to be handled more flexibly, and we would certainly, and the way that we would be able to assess a scheme that also valued in a spectacular way those sorts of view lines without it being explicitly set out in those envelopes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in two ways. One way is through the built form envelopes, which define a view line between buildings, or from the civic space towards the bay. So there's a defined minimum gap between buildings there to allow a view from the civic space to the bay. The other is we do actually define the view from Dickens Street in the site brief as an approach to the marina from Dickens Street. A view corridor should be created through the primary pedestrian area towards the shoreline. So we do describe the view in on page 54, and then the criteria says that those views should be protected and enhanced.
Thank you very much. Councillor Copsey, were you asking a question? Yes, but it's on a different Okay. So can we move from the view lines raised by Mr Nyagwi to a couple of the issues raised by Mr Tanner? The boat service function, which I understand was in the vicinity of 12%. Is that insufficient, or what's your comment and advice about that?
Thank you, Mayor. There is no requirement for the future tenant to include commercial space in a particular area on the site apart from within the defined built form envelopes. And so they have the ability to include whatever they need to around operational functions and where they need to put them. They can define those. What we have done, though, is allow for the inclusion of commercial footprint within, to have the boat shed, the boat storage, to also have some additional commercial function so that they're not two completely separate buildings, but this allows for them to flow in together and allows for the innovation from the market to define where they want to place things and how they want to combine the footprints. But we're not constraining the market, so they can design the whole site for where they need, what they need to include and how they want to place it.
Councillors, I'm going to breach protocol and ask if there are any follow-up questions on that particular issue. I don't see any. Now, if I get this right, the second issue raised by Mr Tanner was to do with some of the non-boating functions, the kiosk, proximity of the kiosk and location of the kiosk, and the need for soundproofing of some of the mooted hospitality businesses.
Through you, Mayor, in regards to the kiosk, there is no requirement for Rollo's kiosk to be retained under a future redevelopment. The whole site is presented as an opportunity to be reimagined, and so Rollo's kiosk was really just being referenced as a statement as to how it's functioning at the moment, with no intention of specifying retention. Again, that's up to the innovation from the market about how they structure their proposals for the site, where they place the different amenities, both commercial and non-commercial access for the public. What was the second part of that?
About the soundproofing.
Soundproofing can be considered as part of the planning controls, but we can also look at how we can include that as part of the procurement to make sure that we're holistically covering off on that. So I feel that we can address that appropriately outside the site brief.
Thanks very much. Any further follow-ups? No, let's move on to Mr Holland's 4 issues. The first one, which is the much discussed issue of the bridge. So Mr Holland suggested making it mandatory part of the site brief.
Thank you, Mayor. The reason why we're proposing that the connection to the across the Marina entrance, which we're calling a bridge but could actually be interpreted as going underneath, where however that connection could be developed. Why we're not proposing that it be mandatory is that it's uncertain whether or not it could actually functionally work for the site, and the cost of the bridge or however it's achieved. But we know that it's something that's highly desirable, and so what we're proposing is that we put it out to the market through a competitive process, indicating that the connection, the bridge, is highly desirable, and that we encourage the market strongly to respond to that positive intention, but also to make sure that we're not imposing something that may not be possible or that has unintended consequences.
Thanks very much. Mr Holland had some interesting ideas on the beacon, whether we... Is there flexibility in the site plan to take into account some of those thoughts?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Not currently. It is mandatory in the site brief that the pilot beacon be retained and restored and for the life of the lease. The beacon does have its own heritage citation, so therefore has some level of protection. Will need to be considered in any redevelopment or demolition. It does have a function, I understand, as a pilot, as a wayfinding device for boat users. It could be something that you might choose to change, but currently it is mandatory that the beacon be retained.
Questions? Oh, sorry, David. Councillor Brand.
It does strike me as quite a good idea that one day, maybe when a bridge is built, that it could actually not just connect with the beacon, but actually somehow incorporate or even redo the beacon. I'm just wondering, the thing that's keeping, I just want to ask you, the thing that's keeping the beacon as a mandatory thing is its heritage listing at the moment? And what would it eventually take in the future for that to be reconsidered?
Through you, Mayor, the reason for the retention of the beacon was there was a lot of enthusiasm for retention of the beacon, and it is a focal point on the site, and also it does have the heritage citation. So there hadn't been any discussion about it being changed or moved throughout the whole consultation that we've had. This is a new idea that's been raised today. It's not one that we've heard before. So all of the feedback that we've had to date has been about the retention of the beacon and having more access to the beacon rather than changing anything about the beacon itself. In order to, I might hand over. Yep.
A heritage citation doesn't mean that the heritage object or building can't be ever modified or changed. It does mean, however, that the heritage value of that object needs to be considered in any future adaptation or changes to the object.
Thanks very much. The penultimate one was, I don't think I've recorded this fully enough. It was about Boats Vista. Was that Peter? Visiting. Oh, visiting boats. The nature of visiting. I know that visiting boats is very important in marinas further north. Can I ask you to perhaps give us some advice on that, Ms McLean?
Thank you, Mayor. What we have aimed to do is develop a site brief that supports a procurement process that will go out to market to get the very best modern marina that is a destination and fulfills the vision and the objectives for the site, which is in part creating a destination that's different to other destinations along the foreshore. As part of that, the operating model that will be proposed by the proponents will include a range of things, and so we're leaving how the marina is proposed and envisaged to the market, and using the competitive process to get the very best modern interpretation of a marina that is possible. And it no doubt will contemplate things such as visiting boats, but that's something that we would need to look at. What is the market proposing?
And finally, the question of the necessity of a planning amendment, which was an interesting question.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Officers propose that the existing planning controls would not adequately facilitate the vision and objectives for the redevelopment of the St Kilda Marina as specified in the brief, nor perhaps provide the level of certainty to stakeholders, council, community and future leaseholders. As it's proposed to appoint a commercial operator to develop and then use and manage the use of the various facilities at the marina and potentially expand the range of activities undertaken there, it's appropriate to have the land rezoned from the public park and recreation zone to a zone that's not necessarily predicated on the use and development of the land by a public land manager, i.e. council. And we believe that changing the zoning better supports the possible mix of uses as envisaged in the site brief. A report will be coming to council on June 5 proposing a planning scheme amendment for council to consider. That report will include the proposed approach and timeline for that proposed planning scheme amendment.
Thanks very much. So I think all of the questions I've tried to put. Councillor Copsey?
Can I ask officers so there's a minimum 20% of the site figure designated for public open space. Can I ask how that figure was arrived at and what calculations have informed it?
Through you, Mayor, the 20% minimum requirement for open space provision in the site brief was determined through a range of scenario testing on the site. Through the community panel process, we worked through a number of different iterations of what ifs. So what if we included all of these things and changed the formation of them? Could we achieve what would be possible to achieve? And out of that came the 20% minimum provision, which we think is a balanced outcome, which is a significant increase to what is there now, and works with the discretionary criteria, which encourages more public open space. It also balances the need to fit other things on the site, including the trailer parking, car parking, the commercial and also the marina operations. The 20% public open space provision does not include the through fare, so the public boulevards and the bike and paths. It only includes the true public open space areas, so it actually is a larger number when you consider all of those spaces. But all in all, it's not a the number is really a balance of what we think we can achieve with room for more as encouragement to the market. But we think that this is making sure that we don't put a requirement in there that is too onerous and can't be achieved.
Councillor Copsey?
Just to follow up. So it's, I take from that it's been estimated based on various site configurations that have been kind of hypothecated through the process. Do officers consider that a stretch open space requirement of 25%, for example, would be infeasible?
Through you, Mayor, yes, the 20% minimum has been estimated, and an additional 5% could be achievable as a minimum requirement. We wouldn't be able to say with certainty without doing some testing, but you know, it's certainly possible that it could be, but I wouldn't be able to say that with certainty without doing the same kind of testing we've done with the minimum 20%. Yeah.
Any further questions? Resolutions? Councillor Brand? Could I get you to put your little red light on?
Okay. I would like to move a resolution with some amendments on it.
Sure. We don't have an alt rec, do we?
I think
we
there
do.
may be one prepared in there. Slow old word.
Sorry.
Yes, that looks like it. Okay, so it's basically to take the officer's recommendation as written in the report, but then amended with the words at 3.2, including the following amendments. 9.4.1.3, brackets mandatory, provide a free, publicly accessible and active civic heart of a minimum 700 square metres area with shelter and a connection to the water and boating activities, then highlighted in bold, which is the new words in it, within the envelope shown on figure 16 or an alternative, I might say alternative rather than alternate, an alternative location providing an equivalent level of amenity. 9.4.29 move this sentence from mandatory to discretionary. Structured car parking to be sleeved with active uses when addressing key public spaces. And 9.4.30 in brackets mandatory, delete some words there so that the thing reads as visible car parking structures must demonstrate design excellence and incorporate Councillor Pearl's elbow, high quality screening. Sorry, I'll just delete Councillor Pearl's elbow, sorry.
Can I ask a clarifying question before you second it? Yes. Which is allowed. Take me through your intentions on 9.4.1.3, if you could. It's a bit of a wind tunnel down there potentially, so an open space of that size, not albeit that large.
The intention is some recently devised documents have shown an envelope where we would want to locate this concept of a civic heart, with a minimum amount of footprint within a certain sort of boundary. And, you know, this is, I think, well, I certainly think it's a great idea and it's a really important one, but this one would just free it up to a certain degree that if a proponent wanted to organise the whole marina in a certain way that its civic heart, which would remain as a mandatory thing to do a civic heart, in inverted commas, could possibly be in a slightly different location. So it just allows the flexibility of the proponents to sort of to rethink the marina rather than to do what we have imagined ourselves. The need for such a thing is still mandatory, but the location of it is just being freed up to by that last clause saying it could be an alternative location that provides an equivalent level of amenity. And do you want me to do the other ones, or?
No, just that one there was the one that, thank you very much.
Okay, can I ask, is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Bond. Now, before we proceed, I understand there's another amendment. There's amendment. So I'm treating this as a substantive motion. So the officer's recommendation has been amended, so that's not the substantive motion. That is now the substantive motion. So is there an amendment? Oh, okay.
Sorry, Maurice. Councillor Brand needs to speak to it first.
Okay, if you speak to it first,
Okay.
Councillor Brand.
Speaking of Councillor Brand, this is a minor. These amendments are minor amendments to the officer's recommended motion, and the whole thing is a large, important, and elaborate recommendation to approve this site brief. The site brief is very complicated, and all the way through there are you can find little problems with things here and there. A lot of them have been clarified in lengthy discussions with council officers, and this last three here just have cropped up at the end of that conversation and weren't incorporated into the officer's, the draft of this recommendation. So they have been devised by officers in response to certain queries and questions that have come up in these discussions, and they are just, generally speaking, to avoid making very important and very desirable design moves, just to make sure that they weren't framed in such a mandatory way that equivalent alternatives weren't completely excluded, or minor design changes like not necessarily having a building volume next to a car park volume that happened to face a public space. If we were faced with a situation that could have been presented by a proponent as a wall with like a beautiful wall, or with a great piece of kinetic art on it, or a green wall or something like that, and it would have actually technically excluded the entire proposal from consideration because of that. So we just wanted to make sure that it could be loosened up a little bit, put into the mandatory in the discretionary section, that particular thing about sleeving the car park, which might not be that easy to do, to put it as a very desirable thing to do, rather than a must thing, which could have eliminated, for a very minor reason, a whole excellent scheme. And similarly, put a slightly broader mandatory approach to car parking, that whatever the case, whether it's sleeved all the way around or not necessarily sleeved in every single area, that it has to demonstrate design excellence and appropriateness and what have you. So we're still preserving the values, but perhaps just avoiding unintended consequences of disqualifying designs because of minor details.
Thanks very much. Councillor Copsey?
Second. Councillor Bond is a
Bond, and then we go to the amendment? Okay, if we have one.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with all of Councillor Brand has said here. Over the last couple of weeks, as we've discussed, we've made a few minor changes. A few of the mandatories have become discretionary, not to allow more on the site, but to give whoever it is that's going to come to us with designs and proposals for the site flexibility to alter our thinking of where we think everything should go, if they were able to show to us that there are better alternatives out there. I think it was mentioned earlier tonight about having that 500 square metres in the boat sheds, we could either tack that 500 square metres, that additional built form, onto the end of the boat sheds, or if we incorporated that and expanded the boat sheds a little bit, the exact same built form is the exact same size. There is no change to the built form that is potentially go there, but it allows for a commercial hospitality type, whatever business to go within that built form in any location the designer chooses to place that within the built form of that particular area. Same with the Civic Heart. I think officers had an opinion on this is where the Civic Heart should go, and it's a box on the diagrams. Somewhere within here there must be that Civic Heart. Yes, that's a nice place for it, and we've made it clear up there it's desirable. But if a designer has an alternate that improves on what we think the site should currently be, we shouldn't exclude that from the final proposal coming to us, which is why we've just made a few minor changes there to allow a bit more flexibility on this site. I think firm believer that we can only design so much, and we only think of so much whilst we go through the process, and we don't want to constrain the experts, the architects, the planners, designers who are going to come back to us with these proposals. And we want to see the best possible outcome here, and by having as much flexibility as possible without increasing the envelopes of what is permitted on the site will allow people to come back to us with hopefully what are better designs than what we currently imagine the site to be. So therefore I support Councillor Brand's amendments.
Thanks very much, and I think you two have really put in over the past few months. Councillor Copsey.
I'd like to move an amendment to the substantive motion, please.
Sure.
So that would be a change to criteria 9.4.2. And for 9.4.2, it would be a deletion of the words, if a bridge is to be constructed as part of the proposal. That's it. And then the rest of the criteria remains. And to delete 9.4.3, which is below, which reads, if a bridge is to be constructed as part of the proposal, a peninsular promenade path, see figure 13, must include a minimum 4 metre wide pedestrian priority shared path. Provision must be made for the widening of this path as an outcome of a future bridge to a minimum 3 metres for walkers, minimum 0.5 metre separator and 2.5 metre bidirectional cycle path. So,
can I just quickly point out a typo?
Yes, bidirectional.
Bidirectional.
Yeah, bidirectional. Thanks.
Just
That's
delete
the amendment.
Delete O.
Yes.
Those two.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Seconder, Councillor Simic. I'll just ask, is that acceptable to the mover and seconder? Okay, it's amendment. Okay, so Councillor Copsey, could I ask you to speak to it?
Thank you. So throughout this process, one of the opportunities that's been very exciting is the potential to open up the peninsula to further public travel and enjoyment. Throughout the process, there's been discussion about accessibility of the peninsula, and part of what we have on the foreshore at the present is the amazing Bay Trail, a beautiful asset which is enjoyed by lots of people for fitness and for taking in the beautiful natural environment. Key element of the peninsula that I've been keen to see, and that I know many in the community have been keen to see, is increased pedestrian and cycling access out onto that peninsula, to travel out, to enjoy the beacon, and to enjoy better views over the bay if we can get better access to that great piece of underutilised public space. Throughout the process, there's been an issue with the separated cycling path on the peninsula becoming tied to the provision of a bridge. So as the criteria currently read, there's actually no cycling provision out onto the peninsula. There's no, and there's actually an active discouragement if you have a look at 9.4.15, I believe it is. Another criteria within the site brief. Apologies, I'll just get to the page so I can read the words. Essentially, what this amendment aims to do is to we're not going to be able to stop people from riding bikes and taking scooters and so on out onto the Peninsula Promenade. My fear is if we don't provide good facilities for all users out there, will lead to a situation where there's actually a bit of conflict between users, and that will decrease enjoyment overall of access to the peninsula. So by removing the first part of this sentence, the provision of a separated bike path for bike riders out onto the peninsula doesn't disappear off into the never never and become contingent on the provision of a bridge. It's part of the project from the initial design phase, and it will provide for safe and enjoyable use of the peninsula by pedestrians and cyclists and rollerbladers and skateboarders and all of those people who currently use our beautiful Bay Trail. The other thing that I think is good about this amendment is that the criteria that operates to ensure that this is a it's not a thoroughfare and it's a place where people can walk and wander, still operates. So it's not to, it discourages active transport as the kind of mode of travelling along the peninsula. So that will still operate, and I would imagine that we might see market responses to that encourage safe and segregated use on the peninsula, but also encourage people to travel at a pace that's leisurely and and leads to a better user experience for all people who are likely to go out onto the peninsula.
Councillor Simic.
The community engagement report and the report from the community panel in quite a few parts stress the importance of making sure that the marina, the future marina, is a space that's accessible to the community, is a place that can be used effectively, and that it's not over-commercialised. For me, these amendments make it more accessible to a broader number of people living in our area, and not just people who want to use that space solely for marine purposes or boating purposes. So I really support this. I think that it's quite clear that shared bike paths have not worked in many instances in our municipality. We often get reports of conflict between commuters and bike commuters and walkers. And it's really important for us when we're envisaging about best design for the future to make sure that we are designing in a way that avoids these conflicts which we know exist. So I really support these amendments. Councillor Copsey has been really clear that this is something that is important to work into the site plan from the beginning of this process, and so I hope that other councillors will support it as well, because they're very good amendments to the existing site plan.
Councillor Brand.
I won't support this amendment for a couple of reasons. I just want to note that there is actually a mistake in the 9.4.3, the way it's written. It should be if a bridge is not to be constructed as part of the proposal. Yes, that's because it makes sense between these two alternatives of one. What was there before was if a bridge is constructed, then we have a bay trail that comes around through, and that would commend one sort of bike path arrangement, and then if a bridge is not being constructed, then it's a different character of bike path. And that is the original is what I would support, and I would not support this recommendation for two reasons. The first is that I think my personal view is that for a sort of a more meandery, a non-commuter or non-sort of getting from A to B type bike path, I personally think that mingled pedestrian and bike and cycling is the preferred option. And I think that you need to look at the promenade along St Kilda Beach, which has been there for 15 odd years. Very popular, very successful. In all my experience and all my discussions with everybody until recently, seems to me it has been unanimously, in my experience, unanimously regarded as a much better option than what was there before, which was separated bike and pedestrian paths. And I certainly remember myself several times being very close to being skilled over by bicycles because I was dumb enough to not look at the logo on the path that I happened to be standing on and talking to somebody on. And I just found the separation back then a very hostile sort of environment with speeding bikes who expected you not to be on the path that was just in this large public space. And I think it's been a great success, and all of the urban design advice we got was to commingle and for everybody to walk and ride sort of defensively, in a sense, or sort of communally, where manners and consideration actually have to be the guiding principle, and it seems to work really, really well to me, and I just find it very difficult to understand why we would want to revert to a separated path in that sort of circumstance. I do agree that if it's the Bay Trail where people ride long distances in a real sort of determined cycling sort of way, that it is bad for them to have pedestrians wandering into their path, and there needs to be a separation. I totally allow that. But I think if there isn't a bridge there and it is just a sort of a cul-de-sac, in a sense, that there's just no justification for making it so much easier for the cyclists to get out there twice as fast as the pedestrians and then get back to the same spot. The second reason that I wouldn't support it is that I think it's something which, regardless of whether I'm right or wrong or Councillor Copsey is right or wrong, I think it should be left to the designers, who are the expert urban designers, the expert public space designers, who will be bidding for this, to actually determine what would be the best outcome with a coherent, comprehensive approach to all the pedestrian spaces and all of the cycling places through the site in some sort of way which actually looks at it in a coherent way and judges which is the mood of every part of the Marina complex, of how it's going to be used, what the sort of the tenor of public participation in all these places are, and leave it to them to get this balance. If they think that it's really great to have a sort of a free speeding cycling sort of place to get out to the beacon and back again, if it's an isolated sort of peninsula, well then they'll do that, and we'll say that's fine. If the argument is there, and I'll be proven wrong. But I just think it should be up to. We should be leaving this not to be designed by us, by our individual sort of preferences and prejudices and desires, but to actually leave it to experts with a comprehensive, coherent vision to be recommending what we do there. So I would definitely go back to I would not accept this alteration to the original, and I would say if you look at the discretionary parts of this particular part, the potential open space criteria, that criterion 9.4.9 actually gives a separated bike path. It's stated as our preference, which I don't believe should. I don't believe that clause should be there, stating as a separated bike path as a preference if the bridge isn't built there. So I think, if somebody else wanted to move that to be removed, I'd be seconding it. But it's already there in the original, so that's as far as I would possibly go with it.
Thanks very much, Councillor Brown. Can I ask Mr. CEO to help us with this?
I think, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we may have given Councillor Copsey a little bit of errant advice, and I just want to check with Ms McNeil. In relation to the first part of this amendment, Councillor Copsey should probably also have deleted the discretionary criteria 9.4.9 because it doesn't make sense if the first part of this amendment gets up. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, that's correct.
So, in terms of process, I might ask Mr Chick, but I think the mover and second, I don't know if it's a substantive change, Mr Chick. So if the mover and second agree, 9.5.9 is if a bridge is not to be constructed, that's redundant if this amendment gets up. In other words, we're saying you must do it regardless of whether a bridge is constructed or not. That's the effect of your amendment, Councillor Copsey. 9.4.9 becomes redundant because of the first part of your amendment, is our understanding in the brief. So you'd also, as well as deleting 9.4.3, you'd need to delete 9.4.9 as well. Does that make sense? Or do you need further assistance?
It does, and it's incorporated.
We haven't. So
yes, the dimensions are the same as the dimensions are the same as in the mandatory criteria. Yes.
You've made, in effect, through you, Mr Mayor, you've made it mandatory. Therefore, 9.4.9 becomes redundant if your amendment gets up.
Thanks.
So
yes, I accept that.
Agree to that.
Does Councillor Simic, do you agree with that? And I give you leave to amend. So it's a slightly different. Thanks very much, Mr. CEO. That's great. Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this either for all the reasons Councillor Brand very articulately outlined. The reason is we don't know how this particular part of the marina is going to be treated by designers. We would all love a bridge there. We all think a bridge is a highly desirable outcome, but we don't know whether or not it's possible either from an engineering or mechanical point of view or a functionality of the marina point of view or from an economic point of view. So we don't actually know whether we are going to get a bay trail through there. The second part is if we were to get a bay trail through there, we don't know how the designers intend to treat the area through which this bike path is proposed to go. As Councillor Brand pointed out, it may be very similar to our beachfront down on St Kilda there, where we have some hospitality, we have some retail, we have gyms, we have other functions there, where people are coming out and walking across what is a large open area. To run a bike path through there would be very dangerous, and we would have people hit, no doubt, because they are just meandering through this area, not expecting the bikes to come racing through. If we don't have a dedicated bike path, cyclists tend to slow down and be a bit more wary and know that they don't have a direct right of way and can push their way through. They have to slow down and be careful of pedestrians. In the event we don't have any activity along that area, a separated bike path may be a perfectly reasonable outcome. In the event we do have activity in that area, a separated bike path could be dangerous. For the reason we changed some of the elements in the substantial motion, these decisions need to be, in my opinion, left up to the designers, not for councillors to put in here, hey, we'd like this or we'd like that, or put our own little elements within this proposal. We need to give the designers the flexibility to design this. Yes, a separated bike path would be desirable, but we can't make it essential because we don't know how the developers are going to treat this particular area. Therefore, I won't be supporting this.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Now I'm going to move to the... Do you wish to close, Councillor Copsey?
The promenade's been used as an example. To be clear, I'm not on a frolic of my own here. I've received consistent feedback. I'm an avid active and sustainable transport advocate. I don't prefer cycling over other modes of active and sustainable transport. I walk and take public transport a lot around this municipality. I do listen to our local cycling user groups, and the feedback that I've had, particularly regarding the foreshore, is that it's a missing link. The promenade currently along the St Kilda foreshore is a missing link. From personal experience on that foreshore as a cyclist and as pedestrian, separated paths and clearly designated areas for cycling actually help people to anticipate where bikes are going to be. So the intention here is to create a safer and more enjoyable environment for all users. And I'll also just reflect that if we do not see cycling infrastructure, bike riding infrastructure out on the peninsula, regardless of the presence of the bridge or not. So this is not designed to create the Bay Trail. It's designed to make sure that whether the bridge is there and a through connection there is there or not, we have infrastructure that allows people to safely use the peninsula in different ways. And if we don't have cycling facilities there, there is a concern that actually bike riding and the other active transport and recreation things that we currently see on the foreshore, skating and rollerblading, actually will end up with less access to this area than they currently do, because there's also the potential, as the result of the site brief, for the Bay Trail to be relocated further to the Elwood end of the site, and that would actually decrease access if that comes out. So my intent in putting this is to encourage us right from the start to make sure that there is good provision for all users that are likely to come through this area. I understand some councillors have personal experience, but I've received pretty consistent feedback from the cycling community that no paths is not good for either user. Shared paths is slightly better, but still not preferred. Separated paths allow people to anticipate where those people who are moving on bikes, scooters, skateboards and roller skates are going to be moving at a faster pace. Doesn't mean that they're going to be speed demons. And I'll refer to the criteria that I was looking for before and I didn't have in front of me. Apologies. But should this amendment pass, there is still a requirement within the site brief at 9.1.15, which reads, enhance pedestrian amenity and safety with a design that allows for a slower walking environment along the Marina promenade, figure 13, incorporating passive design measures to restrict active travel users, i.e. bike riders and inline skating. So that criteria operates to create that meandering and wandering environment through design, which is still open to how they configure this on the peninsula. But I would submit, councillors, that it's better to be clear about the treatments that we want to see rather than rely on manners, which doesn't always work, particularly if this site gets activated as much as we would like it to.
Thanks, Councillor Copsey. I'll now move to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour of the Copsey-Simic amendment? All those against? I'm going to cast against. for two reasons. I accept all of the arguments of Councillor Brand and Councillor Bond, and secondly, I like to have a practice to cast as close as possible to the officer's recommendation as possible. So
Thank you. Can I request a division on the amendment?
Sure. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Baxter and Councillor Voss. All those against? Yeah. Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross, Councillor Brand, Councillor Bond. I declare that a draw, and I am going to cast, as I said before, against. Now back to the substantive motion. It's been Councillor Copsey.
Apologies, I'd like to move a second amendment.
Which is?
Yes, which is, this one's simpler. It's in relation to the open space criteria to remove the... Criterion. Watch out, or I'll ask for a criterium as part of the...
oh, that's a bicycling pun.
Yes. So to increase the minimum area to 25% of the total unencumbered land area within the Marina project area for public open space.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Baxter? Excuse me, can I just ask of the... I just wanted to ask of the officers... Sorry? We're in debate. Okay, I won't. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes, so I've asked in the chamber tonight the strength of the calculations that have informed the 20% figure. I appreciate that there's been a lot of thought and consideration given to the site throughout the panel process and throughout briefings. It seems to me that at a minimum 25% is quite feasible on this site. We've looked at the built form envelopes that are going to be, that could ensue as part of the designs that will be coming to us. We've got a fairly good idea of the types of thoroughfares that we'd like to see. The reason I'm putting this increase to the public open space requirement is I start with the position that all of this area is public space. And so I actually would like to see this criteria quite a lot higher. We haven't done an in-depth analysis of either the 20% or the 25% figure, but its officers feel that the 25% could be feasible in the same way that the 20% could be feasible. We don't know what kind of design responses are going to eventuate in response to the site brief. I think that 25% public open space on a site that is all public land is absolutely the bare minimum I'd like to see. I note that this is the mandatory requirement and that there's a discretionary requirement asking for this to be maximised. So certainly I would consider that our discretionary criteria already anticipate that there is going to be potential for a larger amount of open space on this site, and I think that we should set the beginning bar slightly higher in terms of the amount of open space, dedicated open space that's available to members of the public on this site.
Thanks very much. Councillor Baxter? Does anyone wish to speak against it? Councillor Bond?
Yeah, I won't be supporting this. 20% open space, I think, is sufficient. If we increase the open space up to something like 25%, all we do is force the designers of this proposal to take their proposals up a lot higher than they potentially would in order to free up open space at ground level. I don't think we want to take that flexibility away from the designers here. Obviously, we've got it in there that anything above 20% would be desirable, but I don't think it should be mandatory that we go higher than 20%. We need to allow that flexibility so that the experts in this area, when they come to us with a design proposal, can aim towards our desired outcomes, but it shouldn't be mandatory if it's going to reduce their flexibility in other areas and force them to build taller buildings on the site if that's not something that enhances the proposal. The designers must have the flexibility in this proposal to come back to us with very different options. We've certainly tried tonight not to force their hand. We want to have some flexibility here. We don't want to dictate to them. We don't want to design the building for them. We want them to come back to us with their designs, not the other way round. So I won't be supporting this.
Mr. CEO wants to make
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, again, because the discretionary criteria 9.4.24 says 20 for completeness, that should be increased to 25 to make your motion
Thank you,
sense.
that's acceptable to me.
And Mr. Councillor Bax would need to agree to that, which would be to change 9.4.2.4 from 20 to 25 as well. That helps. Sorry, I'm just making sure it makes sense.
Councillor Simic.
I just want to very quickly rebut the logic that we've just heard, because in planning we've seen that we have to be very careful about our controls, because the designs that we get back from architects and people working in this space are often maximised in every way possible. So we'll see an outcome which will see the least amount of open space with the tallest possible buildings, quite likely. I mean, that's what happens. People, when it comes to height limits, go as high as possible. So in my view, I think that we really need to be looking at ways to optimise excess community space. I agree with the arguments that Councillor Copsey has put, and I really hope that we can achieve a better outcome here.
I'm going to speak to this saying, which I don't like to do, but who could argue against extra open space? This is all about an open space exercise. My only hesitation, and it is for me a fatal hesitation, is at this time I haven't given the officers the opportunity to advise me on putting this through the model and whether it works. And so I just can't support it at this time. At another time I would have loved to have supported it, but without advice from the officers, I feel I'm flying absolutely blind in terms of viability and feasibility. Councillor Brand? Councillor Pearl?
I also won't support it on the basis of, again, basic corporate governance principles. No surprises should be the motto for these type of things, and we're all for making improvements to make things better, but making amendments like this on the fly without having the full breadth of advice from officers is very dangerous in terms of unintended consequences. So we all want more open space. We all agree with that. But making an amendment like this at this 11th hour, which seems fairly half-baked, I hadn't seen it before. You'd raise it here this evening. You haven't brought it up with me. Haven't seen any writing. Nothing in writing has been provided. Nothing's been discussed. And certainly I haven't received any advice from the officers about whether or not this number would actually work. So from a basic corporate governance 101 point of view, I won't support it.
Councillor Brand?
Yes, I won't support it, but I've got to say I'm much less adamantly against this one than the previous one, because really there's not a lot of difference between 20 and 25%, and and I think it's a reasonable thing to countenance in this case. But we have heard from the officers that said they have worked out what the appropriate minimum requirement would be for unencumbered open space. There's going to be a lot more open space than this, but unencumbered as a particular subcategory of open space. They have done it for 20%. They have not done it for 25%. They were not comfortable about saying 25% would be fine. They said it could be fine, depending. A study of it could very conceivably turn out to say it's okay, but equally, a study, their study of it might turn out to say it's not okay. So I don't think it's for us to change it here. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we end up with 25% anyway, or more, or much more. When you look at the envelopes, there's lots and lots of room for unencumbered open space to happen. I've got to refute Councillor Simich's contention that we see, that developers will come and try to maximise the amount of development on this site. If it's a stat planning situation, that often happens, that they're trying to get away with as much as they can possibly put on. This is a different thing. We have here two provisions in the officer's recommendation here in the site brief. One of them says there has to be a minimum of a certain amount of open space. That puts a bottom line on it, which has been studied and modelled. And the other one says we need to maximise the amount of unencumbered open space, which means that developers can read. The proponents in this will know that they will do better in their assessment, in the assessment of their proposition, if they have more open space, not less. The incentive is there to make them provide more open space. And they have,
The built form is kept.
Yeah. The expert designers have two roles, two tasks to do. One is to come up with the best overall expert visionary design, and the other is so that's one thing that they can come up with. The other thing is to come up with an explanation of it to the panel that assesses it, that it is a convincing explanation of why this is a better proposition. They're not going to get anything if they don't actually provide that explanation of why it is better the way they're providing it. We are not forced to take what they want, like we are in stat planning, where the VCAT will back them up, probably. We have an assessment panel which has a whole stack of criteria set out in front of them, who are saying, actually, we want more open space. We want more open space, and you need to convince us, even if you want less open space, you need to convince us that that would be better than having more open space. And that's what this process is set up to do, to support that sort of decision making. I think we will achieve 25%. I'd be surprised if we didn't, but I'm not happy to go against a modelled and considered bare minimum, which is what this mandatory clause is setting out, so I'm supporting the status quo in this.
Other speakers? Councillor Copsey?
Well, there are a few things that were questionable in that debate. So it doesn't automatically follow that an increase in the public open space requirement will result in greater height. There's built form envelopes, which are quite a lot bigger in terms of the area in which it's permissible to build, rather than just the actual floor space that will be taken up. So there's obviously a lot of flex within the built form footprint on this site. 20% is a piddling amount, and 25% is nothing as well on a site this scale. I think it's entirely feasible, and councillors can use their own judgment, having looked at the same diagrams that we all have, that the officers have as well. I think we should be stretching to incorporate what is a very small minimum of this site area to send a strong signal that this is public space. It's going to accommodate a variety of uses, including the marina and complementary uses, but it's a public space and it needs to have a large amount of publicly accessible, freely accessible and unpaid access to a site of extremely rare, beautiful amenity on our beautiful foreshore. So I think that this is a really important criteria. That's why I've moved it. this has been brought up repeatedly over the course of our workshops, so it's not a surprise to hear me advocating on these points this evening. It's also been raised with officers prior to this evening, so I'll correct the record there. I can't control which officers, which councillors attend our workshops and briefings, but I have been harping on about this, so it should be no surprise to see that I'm very passionate about making sure that this piece of public land is accessible and provides a broad community benefit. It's currently zoned Park and Recreation Zone. That flavour and that character should remain on this site. This site brief is the opportunity for Council to very clearly delineate what we want to see, the outcomes we want to see, the things that are important. I've tried this evening to raise amendments that reflect what I've seen come through the community panel as really crucial aspects for the broader community use of the site that are totally complementary, that will enhance accessibility of the marina and the functions, the specialist functions that are going to be available there. Throughout the community panel, environment was one of the areas where there was huge agreement. Some parts of the site brief are more contentious, but that was one that came through very strongly. The need for open space was something that was really important to our community through that process. So that's where I'm starting from. 25% should be absolutely feasible on this site. If it's not, then we've got this whole thing absolutely wrong. I hope that councillors will support a small increase in what we're trying to retain for freely available, unencumbered public open space on this site.
Thanks very much. I'll move to the vote on this amendment. All those in favour? All those against? I declare it lost.
Can I request a division on the amendment, please?
All those in favour? Councillor Simic, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Baxter. All those against?
Yeah, pretty flexible.
Councillors Bond, Brand, Voss, Pearl and Gross. And I declare it lost. So we now go back to the substantive motion in the absence of any other amendments. We've had it moved and seconded by you two and spoken to. Is there any other speakers? Councillor Voss and Pearl, in that order, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to say and foreshadow, really, that in the event that this substantive motion fails, that I will move the original officer's motion.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl?
Thanks, Mayor. This is the first time I think I've voted for something on the St Kilda Marina, which I'm very excited to do, and it means it's actually moving to a progressive point, which is very, very exciting. I just want to thank Councillor Brand in particular. Behind the scenes, you've earned your money in the past few months, particularly with also Councillor Bond. We spent a good 30 minutes talking about it 2 weeks ago, where you went through your aspirations for these amendments, and I wholeheartedly support them, and you've put very good arguments forward to this meeting here this evening, Councillor Brand, so well done. And from me to you, thank you very much for your guidance on this, because you've got a lot of experience and perspective to share through your years on council and your professional career also, so well done and thank you very much.
He's looking suitably modest.
Over-flattered.
So, any further speeches on? Do you wish to close, Councillor Brand? Oh, sorry, Councillor Copsey.
Yes, I will speak because I find myself unfortunately.
No, only do amendments.
No, I haven't spoken to the substantive motion yet.
Substantive motion.
So, unfortunately, I find myself unable to support this motion now, this evening. I've spoken at length, so I will keep it short. I think that the site brief is Council's opportunity to make it abundantly clear the kinds of things that we are seeking for the marina. The Marina site is a really crucial anchor along the foreshore. It's a very big opportunity and it's a very big responsibility to be an effective steward of this site. I appreciate all of the very hard work that has gone in from officers and all of our community members who have participated so far. Getting us to this point has been no mean feat, and I think that there are a lot of really great things in the site brief. I unfortunately feel, however, that the balance has not been struck. The 2 points that I have raised tonight are important for a large segment of our community. I'm concerned that we're heading in a direction where we won't see all of those environmental, public access, thoroughfare and sustainable and active transport priorities realised. And so, unfortunately, I find myself unable to support the site brief as it's currently drafted. I do hope that I'll be pleasantly surprised when we see the designs come through. I think that there are some really excellent elements in the mandatory and discretionary criteria. I just don't think that Council has gone far enough in securing some of those aspects that I know are very important to our community. And I'm concerned that some of the contentious aspects are now also being moved out of mandatory criteria where Council was setting very clear standards for the brief and what we wanted to see back, and to discretionary. I understand the intent of that. I'm just concerned that it provides less certainty for our community in terms of the outcomes that are going to come to us. So I thank everybody for your participation in the process. I'm still very supportive of us revitalising the Marina site, but the site brief has got to a point that I'm not comfortable with.
Thanks very much, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Brand wishes to close.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry?
I did want to speak.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Simic. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. I did want to speak as well. I didn't realise there was no other speakers. I just want to thank Councillor Copsey for putting those points forward. They're points with which I agree as well. My concern throughout this process has been that we are putting this out to a commercial market. We have to be very clear about what we believe to be mandatory and what we believe to be discretionary standards. And for me, some of the ones that have moved from mandatory to discretionary tonight are not ones that I am able to support. I have been concerned throughout the process of the over-commercialisation of this area. It is at its heart a public asset, and as stewards of that asset, I think it's critical of us to make sure that we get this process right. I suspect that this will pass tonight, and I do look forward to seeing what comes back to us. And I also want to make sure that I thank all of the officers for the huge amount of work that they've put into this. I note as well that the community panel was split on many of the key decisions, and as such, it's probably no surprise that councillors are also to some extent split on some of the key aspects of this. This is a huge project, the biggest one which as a council we're involved in. The process to this point has been enormous and so ably led by our officers who've done a remarkable job to try and appease everyone and all of the different groups involved. The process from here onwards is also a huge process, and I look forward to participating in that. But the site brief as it currently stands, I don't believe meets all of the criteria that our community would expect, in my opinion, having consulted on this and also paid very careful attention to what we have got back from the community panel process.
Thanks very much, Councillor Simic. Councillor Brand, eventually, third time lucky.
Yes. Look, I support the substantive motion. I just want to just start. I do want to refute something that Councillor Simic just said. Then he said some of the ones that are, some of the criteria, some of the ones that have been moved from mandatory to discretionary, he can't support. There's only been one that has actually been moved from mandatory to discretionary, and that is...
Order, Councillor Simic.
Well, you did say, so you're talking about in plural there, and there's only one, and that is basically a criterion that would have demanded that the 5,000 square metre max of commercial development was sleeved by the 5,000 square metre max of car parking. No, car parking would have been, the 5,000 max of car parking would have been sleeved by the 5,000 square metres of commercial development, which would be almost impossible to do except with one design, which is like a thin strip of commercial all the way around a car park. It is incredibly limiting the way it is written if it's taken literally, and it just can't stand as a mandatory thing. It's well expressed as a desirable discretionary thing, that we should do it as far as possible. I just don't think you should characterise what's been happening here as being this sort of terrible loosening up of a vacuum which will be filled by developers rushing in to gain more and more, sort of development profit from it. It's very important to understand that this is not a stat planning situation. We are trying to avoid, we're trying to protect against the worst outcomes. Here, we are the landlords, we are the assessment panel, we are the clients ourselves, and we are demanding the best outcomes, and we're going through a competitive process to find the best outcomes. The thing that we aren't is we are not the designers, and we are not the operators, and we are not the visionary people who know what happens with the best marinas in the world elsewhere, can bring the ideas here. We are not those people. We should not be predicting exactly what they're going to do and then trying to sort of clamp it down. We need to open up sufficient space for those ideas to be brought in, and then we desire, through the design, the assessment panel, and through the criteria that we have laid out explicitly and at length, decide what the best outcome is. And it's entirely up to us, and it's not even appealable. So, it's not a worry that we open it up a little bit more flexibility. We need to go back in this whole process to what the community panel asked for in the first place. And in many cases, the community panel was quite clear. I think that they have been, in many cases, probably too prescriptive. But I do honour, the work that they put in, the amount of consideration and the amount of balancing of all of the different factors that they did. It was a very, very thorough and I think very successful process. The panel itself, and I've got to say, the officers who have drafted this site brief have done, I think, a very, very good job of translating the panel's decisions into a coherent site brief. And they have been actually, the officers themselves, in the discussions that we've had with them, have been very, very staunch advocates of the community panel's view on these things, things that I, in certain instances, have argued against. The panel, the officers have been very staunch champions of the panel process and the panel outcomes. And I think that's impressive, because these are the layers of legitimacy that this document is built on. The amount of flexibility, I personally am for more flexibility and against more mandatory. So there's been this discussion which has been balanced all the way through. It's been a debate where we've been talking about these things. I've come to accept just about everything which is in the draft brief through the discussion with officers. In particular, the flexibility of the envelopes that they've come up with. It's very easy to look at these envelopes and as presented as these great big yellow sort of rectangles and shapes and what have you on the thing, as, oh God, if this is the shape of the development on this site, it's going to be overdeveloped and it's going to be big and bland and ugly and what have you. These are envelopes into which the envelopes represent 43,000 square metres roughly of potential development site. And into that, there is a maximum. It says there's a preferred maximum of 3,600, which is less than 10% of that. And there's a maximum of 5,000, which is only a little bit above 10% of that, that can actually go anywhere in those envelopes. So these envelopes are going to be largely kept totally vacant of development. It's going to be very, very hard to build any building which makes an impression on the general open space of the whole site, including the corridor down Dickens Street. It's going to be bloody hard. I shouldn't say bloody because that'll go on the record. Hold on. It's going to be very hard to even build a building that obscures the view down Dickens Street, which I hope they don't. But if they do, it could be a really spectacular, piece of building in there. The mandatory versus discretionary thing. Look, I probably said enough about that, and I probably said enough about the two tasks of the designers. One is, of course, to come up with the best ideas, the ones that work in an integrated way with the operations and with the public brief, but it is also for them to actually convince the panel that theirs is the best and the most desirable way of doing it, and they're not going to get anywhere if they don't do that. And the assessment panel is actually equipped with a massive amount of criteria and ideals. And I would note that all of the ideals, whether it's from the financial ideals through to the environmental ideals, through to the public ideals, the functional ideals, all of the basic ideals of this project are in the mandatory criteria. Fundamentally, clearly, powerfully set out in the mandatory criteria, which the assessment panel is going to use in its assessment. So, it's all there. We've been arguing about the fringe areas of actually the actual, almost the measured design responses that would be possible solutions. We're arguing about how much we should be trying to specify those, the possible solutions or not. I say they should all be possible solutions and not be actually mandated. The answers are for the professionals to come up with, and then to be judged by the panel. So I'm I'm a very strong supporter of this whole process. I'm a very strong supporter of this document that's come up in front of us. It's not exactly to my liking, but I think this is something which we as a council, as a whole council and as a community can support as our site brief for this very, very important project.
I'm now moved to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Declare it carried. Thanks very much, councillors. I now would like to go to 14.5 because we've got one member of the community who's going to speak, Robbie, and then I'd like to have a 5-minute break. So, 14.5, alteration to council meeting cycle 2019. Could I ask you to read your name and suburb into the record, please, Robbie?
Robbie Niagui, St Kilda. I'll keep it brief, councillors. I guess broadly, I'm speaking tonight about concern about the timeline in terms of the childcare policy consultations and the like. There's a lot of community interest in this policy area, obviously, and it's really great to see a very detailed discussion paper being put out to the public. I guess the concern, and this is concerns from not just myself but the whole of CAP, is that we're obviously on the cusp of a federal election, and it's likely if there's if the opposition are elected that there'll be some pretty substantive changes in childcare policy federally, and that they will have a pretty substantive change in terms of the context with which council are making their decisions, and also with which the community are making their decisions in terms of how they want to then advocate and submit to council. And I guess I would sort of request that council consider delaying these hearings potentially for a few more weeks to give time for those in the community to reflect upon the results, if there's a change in government, and enable them to then, I guess, advocate to you as a council in a potentially a new policy context.
Thanks very much. Tony. Mr. Keenan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's been two alterations to council meeting. One is the creation of an extraordinary council meeting to receive submissions. The submissions have already closed, so the consultation, so that will be on the 29th of September. Then the date for council to make a decision on a final policy has now been extended. That's largely due to various councillors being away. As you noted, it's a very important decision, so council wanted to make sure that all councils could be present for that, and that's been moved now to September. The first council meeting in September for decision. So there will be ample time. Well, there'll be a clear indication if there's a change of government as to what policy intentions might be for that meeting.
It's a good point, though. Councillors, any questions? Councillors, any motions? Councillor Pearl, Councillor Copsey is seconding. Do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak?
Only to note that the extraordinary council meeting is being put so that we have adequate time to hear community submissions which have already been submitted as part of the engagement. So it is reflecting council's awareness that this is a really important topic to be having with the community. I dare say people will be speaking to their submissions already made, but I'm sure that officers will incorporate further feedback as we consider this issue going forward. And we really encourage everybody to come and speak to us at the additional meeting which has been added. And I want to make sure I get the date right.
It's always good.
Which is Wednesday the 29th of May for the extra Children's Services night.
I mean, I think the point's well made, but we'll have until September. Councillor Pearl, move to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thanks very much. Can we have a few minutes break, please? Okay, well, we're all here, so let's give it a go. To the officers who are remaining, it might be pretty ruthlessly quick down the back straight. So please don't take it personally. Yeah. 14.1, Quarterly Financial Report, March 2019. There are no people from the community who wish to ask questions, but councillors do wish to. Oh, Councillor Voss, and then Councillor Pearl.
Thank you. I have three, but I'm happy to just ask one, and then just on the material adjustments, please. The one-off grant that we received from the Department of Treasury for transition cost for the property valuation. I'm just wondering, have we expended all that? Are you able to talk to how that process has gone? $155,000.
Sorry. Mr. Lowe?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I have to take that on notice because I'm not sure the detail exactly how much we spent.
Second question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll bring that back on. We'll bring back the details on it. But my understanding of the assessment that we've been doing is that that transition funding probably won't be enough to support our overall costs. But I'll make sure that we come back to you on that.
Thank you. My second question is in relation to the parking infringements. There's an adjustment of $710,000, and it talks about the notices haven't been up to what we thought they would be due to staff resourcing issues. Just wondering if that could be explained.
Ms. Blair?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we've had some quite an extensive amount of sick leave in that area, unexpected sick leave, and that has resulted in less staff out on the street.
That's
Thanks very
significant. And my last question is the amount of recurrent adjustments for Barring Jingnang being $458,000. It's lower than budgeted. I'm just wondering if that amount is just for the kindergarten component, or is it also for the MCH and the community room there in terms of the hiring of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I believe that's purely just the kindergarten. There's an offset of... Are you referring to the expenditure? Yes, that's right. At the moment, it's only got one room open. Henceforth, that's why the expenditure is reduced. Also, income's reduced as well.
Any further questions? Councillor Pearl.
A couple of small ones, thanks, Mayor. 4.3.4 capital expenditure has been reduced by 2.1 million. Obviously, there's a very large deferral in capital projects, which seems to be fairly normal. My question relates to point E, the $1.2 million of capital expenditure that's been reclassified according to accounting standards. I'm just wondering if you can give me some more information about how those accounting standards work and how that reclassification's worked.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. When we develop the budget, we make a call on what's operating expenditure in terms of the whole capital program. Some of that relates to, for instance, design, landscaping, comms, and so forth. And all these costs would not be capitalised in as an asset. It would be operationalised. So, henceforth, we've made a call now with more updated information, and $1.2 million has been adjusted.
So just follow up, you don't know that up front until the construction started. Then when the construction's completed, you then determine what's capitalised and what's expensed?
We do make a call, but the detail and we get updated information based on actual tenders and pricing of that.
Mr. Carroll?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So when we set the budget, we have to set the budget at a certain point in time each year. Each of the projects in the portfolio are at a different level of maturity and therefore a different level of certainty around what's precisely capital versus operating costs. When we do set the budget, we make an assessment at that point in time. And as we move through the procurement processes and the actual implementation of those projects, you get the precise mix between what's precisely capital versus operating. But overall, it is going towards that overall project. A good example is that landscaping costs are generally not capitalisable, but they're still part of that overall project that we're implementing. So it's just the split between what ends up being capitalised as part of the asset and what has to be absorbed as an operating expense that year.
Do we have any further questions? Do we have a resolution? Moved Councillor Copsey, Officers Rec, I assume, and seconded Councillor Voss. Do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak, Councillor Voss? Any speakers against? Move to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thanks very much. 14.2, Municipal Emergency Management Plan, the MEMPLAN, Audit. Any questions, councillors? This might be one of those ruthlessly efficient moments. And I'm just sorry we didn't get you on earlier. Happy to move, Councillor Simic. Councillor, who wishes to second? I'll second it. Councillor Gross, second it. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Simic?
Yes, it's been a swift moment, but we were briefed on this not long ago and did go through the Municipal Emergency Management Plan with officers in some detail, and were advised about where that is up to. So I think councillors feel adequately prepared to make a decision tonight.
Look, I will say something. What? Oh, Councillor Brand?
I was just going to say to Peter, leaping 30 seconds ahead, that just to congratulate you on your great final performance at Council tonight.
Look, I did want to say emergency management, in terms of emergency management, one of my most intense local government experiences was when I went up during the bushfires into regional Victoria, and to see the way local government acts in the regions in the face of dire emergencies is quite inspiring. And I know that we're involved in putting people out into those situations. We're not going to talk a lot about it tonight, but that doesn't mean that it's any less important. In the face of emergency, one of the important social structures that's involved in reacting to that, and I think that that's going to be more of a case, particularly for a coastal council in the future. It's so important. Emergencies are so disruptive, and it's one of the really great things that local government can do on hopefully very rare occasions for its community. So just because we're not picking it apart and delving and driving you mashugana with all of the issues that councillors can do, doesn't mean that it's not important. It's fundamental to the services that we offer the community. Councillor Pearl? And then Councillor Voss.
Thanks. When I'm not hanging out with these wonderful group of councillors, I'm CEO of an insurance company, and I see the consequences of lack of planning. And one of the things I've seen, and loss of life that comes through people not knowing what to do, when to do it. And the general consequence, the general similarity with those events is things weren't done fast enough, early enough, and people didn't know how to arrange themselves. So these, and they can have dire consequences, like what you talked about there before 10 years ago. And I've seen firsthand, I saw some horrific events a couple of years ago in South Australia where 3 people got burnt out in a car for no other reason that this sort of stuff wasn't in place. So it's a core business of council to do this, and we greatly appreciate everything you've done. And it's very, very important, and we appreciate the amount of effort you've gone to put this together. I particularly like the non-use of stock images on your front cover. I thought that was a good addition to bring real life to remind people why the hell this thing's in place. No smiley faces and dogs down the beach. So well done to you, and it was a good read. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Voss.
Yes, thank you. I'd also want to congratulate you on doing the full review. It's an incredibly important legislative requirement, putting this together, but also just generally sensible. I've got every confidence in the plan that you've done and you've meticulously put together, so well done on that. But I have to say, I think there's still a bit of work to go. Just recently had an experience in which I heard that there was an algal bloom, for example, in our bay, yet for the 3 weeks that algal bloom was out and there was actually an emergency situation, I had 3 of my children all swimming in the bay from the Lifesaving Club, from sailing, and so there didn't seem to be be any coordinated response to tell the organisations conducting these things with these sports with my kids, for example, and many, many others, that there was a problem in the bay. So there's still a bit of work to go, and I think this plan will actually help, connect all of those dots a lot better. And so keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, councillors. I thought we were going to have our very own emergency responder, the saviour of the bay, Councillor Baxter, pipe up, but he's sick and tired. So, does the mover wish to close? Okay, thank you. We'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thanks very much. Um, 14.3. Proposed lease with Elwood Croquet Club, completion of statutory procedures. There's no questions from the community. Councillors, any questions? Councillors, any resolutions? Moved Councillor Voss, seconded Councillor Bond. Doesn't wish to speak. We'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. 14.4, Assembly of Councillors. There's notes the records of Assembly of Councillors. There are no questions.
I'm happy to move that.
Moved Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Gross. Speakers?
None.
All those in favour? That's unanimous. And there's no notices of motion. Councillors, do we have any reports by councillor delegates? 17, urgent business. Councillors, do you have any items of urgent business? 18, confidential matters. Councillors, we have no confidential items tonight. So there being no further business, I declare this august and auspicious meeting closed.